Here's where we are in the governance series. We completed phase 1, seeing the system, letters 1 to 12. We are in phase 2, design the system, letters 13 to 30. We completed stage 1 through stage 5. We are in stage 6, governance redefined, letters 27 through 30. We just completed letter 27A. Governance is not the navigator. We are in letter 27B. Activity is not accomplishment. In letter 27A, we said that we would first enter the experience and begin with what you see. We will allow your observations to determine where we first point the telescope. What attracts your attention becomes the starting point. From there, we can intentionally change direction, explore other perspectives, and discover what becomes visible that we may not have seen from where we began. Over the years, organizations have opened different doors through which I was invited to enter. Sometimes it was the operations door, a stalled project, a network outage, a support center that was not performing as expected, or a technology implementation that needed assistance. The door is important because it tells us what the organization can currently see. It does not necessarily tell us everything that is occurring behind that door. In this experience, the door was training. An executive contacted me because the organization wanted to prepare its scientists and engineers to integrate artificial intelligence into their business environments. Before developing the curriculum, I wanted to understand what the organization expected those scientists and engineers to be able to accomplish as a result of the training. The executive explained that their people were already advanced. That word needed some context. My purpose was not to challenge whether their people were advanced. I wanted to understand what capability their organization associated with that description. For example, someone may be advanced in Python programming, artificial intelligence models, or data science. Someone else may be advanced in understanding how artificial intelligence becomes integrated into a larger business and technical environment. All may legitimately represent advanced skill, but not necessarily the same capability. I presented a scenario. Suppose a customer comes to one of your scientists or engineers with a business requirement involving artificial intelligence. Can that person understand what the customer is trying to accomplish and then translate that requirement to a project manager as well as to the appropriate technical teams so they understand what needs to be delivered? Can they recognize which parts of the existing environment will be affected and which technical dependencies must work together for the capability to function? I had a very specific purpose asking those questions. Artificial intelligence is frequently discussed as though it were a product or application that can simply be installed, connected, and used. The environment is considerably broader. For purposes of this workshop, consider 6 technological areas that work together to provide the foundational structure for AI: compute, networking, storage, security, collaboration, AI models. Each represents an extensive technical discipline of its own. People can spend entire careers developing expertise in any one of them. I had already seen this happen long before artificial intelligence entered the conversation. During my years training network engineers, networking alone had become increasingly complex. Engineers were attempting to keep pace with expanding architectures, protocols, products, applications, security requirements, and business expectations. Specialization was a natural response. Artificial intelligence did not replace that complexity. It entered an environment in which considerable complexity already existed. That introduced an important distinction into our conversation about the word advanced. Depth and range are different capabilities. A network specialist may possess tremendous depth in networking without requiring equivalent depth in storage or security. The same can be said for specialists throughout the other technical disciplines. The organization may need that depth. It may also need the ability to connect what those specialists know. That was the capability I was trying to understand. If a customer requirement enters the organization at one end, how does it move through the people and technologies responsible for fulfilling it? Who recognizes when a decision in one technical area creates a requirement or consequence somewhere else? Who maintains the connection between what the customer originally requested and what the technical teams eventually build? And what happens at the other end? Eventually, an AI model produces an output. Someone interprets that output. The information may ultimately reach an executive who uses it to make a business decision. Where does the capability reside to maintain the connection from the original requirement through the technical environment to the information upon which that executive may eventually act? The executive explained that their scientists and engineers received information and entered that information into the organization's systems. I reflected the answer back to make certain I understood it. If their primary responsibility was to receive information prepared by someone else and enter it into an existing system or model, then the capability being described was different from the end-to-end capability we had been discussing. The executive responded, "When you say it that way, it makes our people sound like order entry clerks. That was not the purpose of the comparison. I have carried this same observation since 1985 when I prepared a presentation from information a colleague gave me, and an error surfaced the moment he presented it publicly. He told the room I had prepared it, not him. That day, I learned that entering information without verifying it becomes your responsibility the instant an error is discovered. This was never a judgment about the people entering the data. It is a warning about what happens when no one verifies it." Back to our scientists and engineers. They could be highly accomplished people performing exactly the responsibilities the organization had assigned to them. Now we are aware of something we did not understand when the conversation began. The word advanced, just that word alone, was not enough to tell us what capability the organization possessed or what capability the requested training was intended to develop. Let us step back for a moment and consider where we are right now. As we described the scenario, what attracted your attention? Was it the request for AI training, the word advanced, the 6 technologies seamlessly working together as an ecosystem, the movement of a customer requirement through that ecosystem, the response about order entry clerks, or did something entirely different attract your attention? I'm not asking whether you noticed what I noticed. I'm asking you to become conscious of where you pointed the telescope. Your first observation does not have to be the best observation. It is simply where you directed your attention first. That is the experience phase in the executive navigation chart. An event allows the organization to reveal something that previously remained unnoticed. You entered the conversation before being told what it was supposed to reveal. Now comes calibration. Something is different than what I believed. Think back to the moment you first heard, "We need AI training." Does that statement mean exactly the same thing to you now? Something may have changed in your understanding of training, advanced capability, specialization, AI integration, or organizational capability. Something else may have changed that I have not mentioned. Make a note to what changed in what you were seeing. That is the recognition phase of the executive navigation chart. Recognition is when the executive begins understanding what the experience is actually revealing. Notice the distinction in the question. I'm not asking, what is the problem? I'm asking, what do you believe this experience is beginning to reveal? The first question begins moving us toward diagnosis and solution. The second keeps us observing. You may see something different from another executive looking at exactly the same experience. That is not something we need to correct. It gives us additional places from which to look. And that brings us to the calibration with recognition. We need a way to interpret what we have just experienced. Now we have earned the opportunity to work together. You saw what you saw. Let us intentionally direct our awareness in a few other directions. We've already established that depth and range are different capabilities. Let us consider what that distinction makes possible for us to see. The organization needs specialists with depth. The organization also needs the work of those specialists to become connected. So where does that connecting capability reside? in one person, across a team, between teams, within the way responsibilities and relationships have been designed. Within the organization itself, we do not need to choose an answer yet. We are learning to see the possibilities. Now consider the range of capability represented by the journey we have already described. Understanding a customer and the business requirement, coordinating the technical environment, understanding the information produced, and connecting that information to the executive who may eventually act upon it. This leads to a question that may not have been visible when the conversation began. Are organizations increasingly writing requirements for combinations of expertise that may be extraordinarily uncommon in a single individual? If so, another question becomes possible. Are we describing the person we need to develop or hire, or are we beginning to describe a capability the organization itself needs to possess? That does not diminish the importance of individual expertise. It only changes the question. We began with, we need AI training. We can now see the training request in relationship to individual expertise, specialization, integration, and organizational capability without requiring any one of those perspectives to become the answer. That is what changing the direction of the telescope makes possible. Up to this point, we have spent considerable time examining what the scientists and engineers may need to know. Let us change our position and look at the same environment from the executive's perspective. How much does an executive need to understand about the work in order to govern what that work is intended to accomplish? There is no universal answer to that question. An executive responsible for a networking organization does not necessarily need to know how to configure a router or write Python code or develop an AI model. But there may be some minimal level of observational understanding necessary to exercise meaningful judgment over an environment for which the executive remains responsible. I have seen executives approach that responsibility very differently. During my years teaching advanced technical courses, managers occasionally attended classes that cost thousands of dollars, informing me they would never perform the technical tasks being taught. Why were they there? They wanted to understand what their people were doing. They were developing enough understanding not to become technical engineers, but to see the environment their people were working within, understand the conversations taking place around them, and make better informed judgments about the work for which they remain responsible. I have experienced the opposite perspective as well. One of my first managers at my first corporate job told me that he did not need to understand what I did in order to manage me. That raises an interesting governance question. What does leadership need to understand, and what can appropriately remain within the expertise of the people performing the work? We do not need a universal answer, but consider what happens when we point the telescope back towards something we heard earlier. Our people are advanced. We initially examined that statement by asking what the word advanced meant. Now, let us examine it from another direction. What information allows leadership to determine that the capability is advanced? That question is not challenging the executive's assessment. It is asking what the assessment is based upon. What does leadership actually see? What does leadership understand about the work? What information reaches leadership about the capability being exercised? And perhaps, equally as important, what does leadership know about what that capability is actually producing? This distinction becomes important because an executive can see considerable activity without necessarily seeing its result. Activity does not tell the executive what capability is being created, what value is being produced, or whether the organization is moving toward anything it intentionally chose. In order to obtain another perspective from which to consider, let us look at the next phase of the executive navigation chart, called Name, which states, return to letter 13A and identify the structural pattern that best explains the experience. The structural pattern that matches closely to what we are speaking about is innovation theater. Innovation theater does not require people to pretend they are working. The theater the show, the projects, all the daily activities can be occurring, and the organization may still have no clear understanding of what capability or value resulted. The visible evidence of innovation can become a substitute for understanding what the innovation is actually accomplishing. That is a very different way of looking at theater. From this perspective, one form of innovation theater becomes activity without sufficient connection to intended result. We have heard from the executives. Now we will hear from the scientists and engineers themselves. The artificial intelligence workshop began with the scientists and engineers discussing many of the technical subjects we expected to address. During the lunch break, several participants approached me privately. Instead of discussing models, algorithms, programming languages, frameworks, or the technical environment supporting AI, they wanted to talk about what they were being asked to do with those capabilities. Leadership had asked them to develop AI models to support strategic initiatives. That request by itself did not seem unusual. I asked, what is leadership hoping the model will help them discover? One of the scientists responded, we're not really being asked to discover anything. We are being asked to create models that validate premises leadership already believes. Let us stop there. We have just received new information. The scientists have given us another perspective from which to observe the same environment. Once again, changing the direction of a telescope. The scientists and engineers said, we are being asked to create models that validate premises leadership already believes. Stay with that statement for a moment. What are you thinking right now? Did anything in that statement cause you to look differently at what we experienced earlier? Where are you pointing the telescope? What do you believe this experience is beginning to reveal? Has something you considered important earlier become less important? Has something that seemed insignificant suddenly attracted your attention? Or has this new information reinforced something you were already beginning to recognize? This is the calibration part of the name phase in the executive navigation chart, which says, now we have language for what we observed. We do not calibrate because our earlier observation was necessarily wrong. We calibrate because we now have additional information about the same structural pattern. What does innovation theater look like from where you are standing now? The purpose of this workshop is not for you to discover what I see. It is for you to become increasingly intentional about what you are capable of seeing, and then to recognize that another direction may reveal something else. The executive navigation chart takes us into design. Move from the structural pattern to its design resolution and consult the guidance developed throughout letters 13b through 23. The design phase asks, what could be intentionally placed here instead? That is a very different question from how do we fix innovation theater? The second question assumes that we already understand the problem and are ready to prescribe a solution. The first question asks us to use what we have learned from the experience. What capability would you want this organization to possess that would make this experience different? You have observed the organization from several perspectives. Use whichever perspective attracted your attention. Letter 27A introduced several perspectives to broaden your consideration regarding what you decide to intentionally design. One consideration might be toward purpose. What is this course of action intended to fulfill? Another toward stewardship. What is it intended to serve? Strategy. What is it intended to advance? Design. What is it intended to enable? Capability. What is it intended to create? We're not looking for 5 different answers. We are looking at the same proposed design from 5 different directions. Did anything in your intentional design change? Did one direction reveal something about your design that another did not? Did one of the questions cause you to reconsider what you were about to place into the organization? That is why we spend so much time in letter 27A discussing the telescope. The questions do not design the organization. You do. They expand the range from which you can examine what you are preparing to design. Now return to the experience one more time. The original door into this organization was, we need AI training. Imagine what might have happened if we had immediately responded to what was visible through that door. We could have developed the curriculum, select the technologies, train the scientists and engineers, and measured completion. Every one of those activities could have been successfully completed, and we could still have left the larger organizational capability unchanged. That is why design does not begin with activity. It begins with what the organization is intended to become capable of doing. Once that capability becomes clearer, the organization can determine what combination of people, relationships, processes, technology, information, responsibilities, and learning will help create it. The design will be different from organization to organization. That is expected. We are not creating a formula. We are developing the organizational capability to design intentionally. This brings us to the calibration within design. Now we understand what should be intentionally designed or strengthened. That is especially important in this workshop. Remember what Innovation Theater allowed us to see earlier. Even if the activities occurred, they do not necessarily tell us what the activities accomplished. Before leaving design, ask yourself, what would I need to be able to observe that would tell me the organization is becoming capable of what we intended? Suppose the design works, the capability exists, the organization becomes operating differently. Would we have observed enough to realize the organization has developed the capability to design intentionally? The executive navigation chart now brings us to stewardship. Continue guiding the organization with the river, lighthouse, compass, and navigational chart as the organization continues evolving. Throughout this workshop, the organization has continued revealing more of itself. We entered through the training door. We considered what the word advanced actually represented. We expanded our view of artificial intelligence from a single application or model to an ecosystem of interconnected technologies and people. We examined the relationship between specialized expertise and the broader capability the organization may need to possess. We considered how much observational understanding leadership may need in order to exercise meaningful judgment over work for which it remains responsible. Then we identified Innovation Theater as the structural pattern that most closely described what was becoming visible. The scientists and engineers subsequently gave us information we did not possess when we first made that observation. None of the earlier perspectives became invalid. Our perspective expanded. That is why stewardship is the responsibility of the navigator. The river continues moving. Technology changes. People change. Leadership changes. Business priorities change. New information becomes available. The lighthouse reminds us of the destination intentionally chosen. The compass provides orientation through the structural patterns. The navigational chart reminds us of the terrain we have already traveled. The executive brings those instruments together. Stewardship, therefore, does not ask whether the activities associated with our design resolution are still occurring. Those activities tell us that work continues. Stewardship asks us to remain connected closely enough to the organization to recognize whether the capability intentionally designed is still present and still moving the organization toward its intended destination. That distinction is especially important after what we experienced in this workshop. We learned that visible activity can appear successful while telling us very little about what capability or value is actually being created. The same principle applies after design. A design resolution can be implemented successfully, and the activities associated with it can continue operating. Stewardship keeps the navigator observing what those activities are producing as the organization evolves. That brings us to the calibration within stewardship. Stewardship has reached another level of maturity. From this new altitude, relationships that were once hidden become visible, allowing the next stage of the journey to begin with greater clarity and intentionality. Look at what became visible during the workshop. The request for AI training was connected to the meaning of advanced capability. Advanced capability was connected to specialization and integration. Specialization was connected to organizational capability. Organizational capability was connected to executive observational understanding. Executive understanding was connected to what leadership believed the organization was accomplishing. And the scientists introduced another relationship between the capability being developed and what leadership was asking that capability to produce. Those relationships were present throughout the experience. What changed was our ability to see them. That is calibration. We end this workshop able to observe a much larger organizational landscape. The river did not tell us where to go. The lighthouse did not steer us. The compass did not choose the course. The navigational chart did not make the decision. The telescope did not decide where to look. The executive remained the navigator. That is stewardship. And with each calibration, the navigator continues from a higher altitude. Thank you.